Oh, there we go. Hey, happy Thursday morning, guys. Sorry, technical glitch on my end to get it rolling. So it's Thursday morning. It should be Friday. My brain is already at Friday. Uh, but we're here for another episode of Bammers. I'm Matt Scalisi. I'm joined by Ben Flanagan here, and we're doing a fun topic today. It's I would say this is in more of the mean spirited end of fandom, which is a crucial part of fandom. Let's be honest about it here. There's fun parts about it. There's parts that are just pure joy and positivity, and you're enjoying the things you love with your friends. But part of being a fan is being in an exclusive group that some people aren't a part of, and it appeals to that little part of you that like to sit at the same table at lunch in high school and form cliques and stuff like that. It appeals to the tribal parts of our nature, and that's part of what we're gonna deal with that on Bammers sometimes. Ben, on his podcast of the same name, has definitely delved into that side of things. But specifically today, what we're going to look at is what we're calling Alabama's pettiest wins, the wins that meant more than just a notch in the W column. They perhaps carried with it a little bit of extra satisfaction because of perhaps things that had happened in recent history. So Ben, this was your pick. I threw it out there to you and said, what should we do for our topic this week? And this is what you picked. I'm curious where you think this one came from. What appealed to you about this idea so much?
Well, let me say two things really quick, because you're right. Like, this is more of a mean-spirited topic. But one thing I pride myself with the Bammers podcast is it's introspective, and it's taking a look at some of the darker elements of being an Alabama fan or being a fan of anything, really. And I often focus on the losses. Remember, we talked about the toughest Auburn losses or the toughest losses ever that we've seen as Alabama fans. I talked to a sports psychologist about how Alabama fans cope with losing when it happens so rarely. And it's really hard to talk about the losses, Matt. Like, it hurts. You're reliving painful memories. And so sometimes you just want to erase all of that and talk about the good stuff that nobody else has any experience with other than this fan base. There are some exceptions here and there. So I'll just say that we cover all the ground. We are mostly very nice, and we're mostly very introspective and honest about what it's like to be an Alabama fans. And we will relive those painful memories. But what inspired me to do this list this week is, I don't know if you've seen, but Tim Tebow's back in the news, Matt, back in the sports news. He's leading every headline once again. It feels like 2011 all over again, where Tim Tebow was in the NFL, and he was taking NFL media by storm as either the Denver Broncos quarterback or the New York Jets, punt protector, or the New England something, I don't know, but wherever he went, it was a media storm. And I think that, that's understandable to a degree, but it's like, hey, it's like NFL media and these folks who are just so obsessed with this guy that we had watched for 4 years being SEC fans. It's like dangling a carrot, and they can't not focus on it for some reason. He's that polarizing. But anyway, him being back in the media now that he's signed with the Jacksonville Jaguars and has been reunited with his coach Urban Meyer and is now the face of the franchise, as it were, if he even makes the team. It reminded me of when Alabama finally took the crown from Tim Tebow and what it was like to watch Tebow lose and the satisfaction that everybody had from beating Tim Tebow, and something that Tim Tebow did that I think a lot of fans still remember fondly, whereas Tim Tebow might remember it much differently. And we'll get into it a little bit later, more specifically what Tim Tebow did and what people remember about that moment. And somebody's even referencing it right now, I think.
We've already got comments coming in, and as always on Bammers, we want you guys to contribute to the discussion and give us your picks. We're going to be going through our picks for the pettiest wins for Alabama on our show today. But if you guys want to contribute some of your own picks as well, we will highlight those on screen. Matt Lunsford already has one that I think we're probably – you've already referenced. We're going to talk about it at some point today. Probably one of the pettiest moments in Alabama fandom for sure. But let's go ahead and dig into it, Ben. Let's pick up the first game you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, and I kind of just want to go through the definition of petty real quick, and like
Sure.
what makes this a petty win? What makes all of these petty wins? And you mentioned it before, right? Where it's like you feel like you're part of this exclusive club that none of these other college football fans can get into, and you really relish that. You really take pride in being an Alabama fan. And some of us were just lucky that it worked out that way. Like there are bandwagon fans out there. Maybe we'll talk about being bandwagon fans on a future episode, but the way I look at this is Schadenfreude, right, Matt? If people aren't familiar with Schadenfreude, you're taking pleasure in other people's misery. In specifically in the case of college football fandom, right? And so with number 5, Matt, I'm going to go with 2018 Ole Miss. The 2018 Ole Miss game. It's like why would you, of all games, like why 2018 Ole Miss? Like Alabama just crushed them. Exactly. Like, and the reason it felt so good to me is that Alabama was still kind of coming off of a couple of years when Ole Miss owned Alabama, 2 straight years in 2013 and 2014. And Alabama obviously righted the ship since then. But in 2018, after Alabama had won that national championship and Tua Tagovailoa had taken over as the head honcho of the offense, there was a lot of hype around him, a lot of hype around the team. And Ole Miss was going to be the first to take him down. And their first play from scrimmage, Matt, if you remember, they hit DK Metcalf, who is a superstar wide receiver in the NFL now. They hit him for a 75-yard touchdown bomb on the first play. And they knew that they were going to win that game that moment. They knew it. Matt Luker, their then head coach, was fired up and fist pumping on the sideline. And then what happened? Alabama went on. They went for 62 unanswered points. 62 unanswered points. And just absolutely buried Ole Miss behind Tua at the peak of his powers as Alabama's quarterback, plus those amazing wide receivers, most notably the future Biletnikoff winner, Jerry Jeudy, who just went off on these guys in this game. But what's
funny, Ben, that's the 75-yard pass that opened the game for a touchdown for Ole Miss was not even the longest touchdown pass scored in that game.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, Jerry Jeudy had a 79-yard touchdown from Tua a little bit later in the first quarter. So just a completely, I mean, that 2018 Bama team, I think it's what we've talked about this before on the show. Some of these teams are going to end up sort of historically underrated over the years as it goes by because of how the season ended. But that 2018 offense, when they were rolling, really, really comparable to this 2020 team that we just saw. I mean, they were unstoppable for large chunks of that season.
Yeah, it didn't end well, obviously. Alabama was a buzzsaw that ran into a bigger buzzsaw in the national championship game, and Clemson took care of it. But, yeah, it's like, why would you care about the Ole Miss game? Like, Ole Miss was not on the level of Alabama, but it reminds me of that Michael Jordan documentary, The Last Dance, right, that SNL just spoofed, where it was a look at when Michael Jordan was playing that quarter game with the security guard, and then when he lost the first time, all he wanted to do is just bury this guy until he didn't have any money, he didn't have any clothes, he didn't have a marriage, he didn't have anything else. And I think it was the Dennis Rodman, the guy playing Dennis Rodman, says, when Michael Jordan plays you, he doesn't just want to beat you, he wants to dominate you. And it doesn't matter who the opponent is. So Ole Miss was the unfortunate recipient of this ire from Alabama in 2018.
I'm going to throw one more stat from this game out that makes me laugh looking at the box score right now. Alabama won this game 62-7, and Tua Tagovailoa, the starting quarterback in this game, only completed 11 passes. So this is probably the most efficient beatdown. This has got to be up there in terms of the least amount of work Alabama had to put in to completely blow out an opponent ever.
Yeah, I don't remember what the halftime score was, but I remember being disturbed by it, Matt. Like, just like I was like, this isn't right. Like what Alabama's doing to Ole Miss right now.
It was 49-7 at halftime.
There you go. Yeah. So it's just like, where can it go from here? It was over. Honestly, it was over after that first Ole Miss touchdown. That was a problem. after they threw that, and it just was bad news for them. So yeah, that's my first pick.
Nice. Let's roll through to another one.
Yeah. Okay. So number 4 is another mid 2010s game. I'm going to go with 2015 Georgia. And Matt, remind me, was this the last time that Alabama wasn't favored leading up to a game?
That's correct. This is the last time Alabama entered a game as an underdog, and Ole Miss, who we just talked about, played a role in that. This was a time wherein I guess Alabama didn't get quite the same level of benefit of the doubt as they get today. It had been a couple of years. It had been an agonizing 2 full seasons plus since Alabama had won a national championship. They did not win in 2013 or 14, and then they lose to Ole Miss early on in the season in 2015. Georgia is getting a lot of hype, and I think suddenly what happened was college football kind of decided, okay, well, now it's over. We've moved on from the Alabama dynasty. We don't have to take these guys seriously as the unbeatable juggernauts of college football anymore. And they were ranked, I believe, in the teens, almost unthinkable today for a mid-season Alabama team, and rolled into this game that really the conventional wisdom said Georgia was about to kind of end Alabama's season coming into this game.
Yeah, weren't favored leading up to the game. I feel like it may have even been a push, changed to a push right before kickoff. I might be wrong there, or it was like Vegas, like almost felt like they were doing the wrong thing. I don't know. But Alabama, like you said, they were 2 weeks removed from losing to Ole Miss at home. It was a brutal game. And it was after that dark period you were talking about, 2 years with no national championship. But Alabama, they were ranked 13th in the country. Very low for Alabama. I mean, it's like hard to even believe that they would have been ranked that low. But they were left for dead as a non-contender that season. And we obviously knew that they went on to win a national championship, but not before they just went in and obliterated Georgia in the rain in Athens. And all those students dressed up like the Joker with their spiky shoulder pads. For them, Matt, all those moments will just be lost in time like tears in the rain. And Alabama just beat them every way that they could have. And Georgia came out hot. They came out talking trash. You remember before kickoff, I think Georgia met Alabama as the whole team was walking out to the field, and just they about got into it. There's a kind of a pregame scuffle. And then after that, fired Alabama up. They beat them every way they could. You had a Jake Coker bomb to Calvin Ridley for a touchdown. You had one of those soul-crushing Derrick Henry runs for a touchdown, and Eddie Jackson pick 6. You had Minkah Fitzpatrick blocking a punt and returning it 1 yard for a touchdown. I mean, this was just a chef's kiss of a game for Alabama, and they wouldn't lose again for the rest of the season, all the way to a national championship. So Georgia, sorry, it just had to be you.
Yeah, Matt Lunsford in the comments, they're talking about Jake Coker, and Ben, I know you're on this train of saying that Jake Coker is a criminally underrated player. And you look at, again, I think his stat line in this Georgia game is pretty indicative of the kind of player he was and what he did over the course of the entire season. And it doesn't really show up that well in the stats. He was 11 for 16 for 190 yards and 1 passing touchdown. He also rushed for a touchdown in this game. And it's easy to look at that and compare it to what we see now and say, well, pretty pedestrian game. But I think that Coker really embodied the style of play that 2015 team was known for, and I think Henry has obviously become known as the symbol of that team. But Coker was just as much a part of that identity. He was so tough. He was a guy who was tough to bring down, and despite not really having a ton of foot speed, he was a really kind of dangerous guy if he got loose. And if you go, we were actually just looking at this game last week. That touchdown that he scored rushing, it's not just an up the middle rush that he did. He actually did kind of a play fake and then ran out into a naked bootleg for a touchdown. Nobody went after him because people didn't really take Jake Coker seriously as a rushing threat. So I think this 2015 game against Georgia kind of established who that team was. And they really carried that identity forward for the rest of that season.
Yeah, and I think it really established Coker as the guy. And really, I think the Ole Miss game played a part in doing that too, because people will remember that he was benched in the Ole Miss game. He did not start. Cooper Bateman started in that game. There was some skepticism about Coker going into that week, and they got antsy about it, and he didn't start, but he came in and nearly led Alabama back to a comeback win and showed a lot of guts. But I think it was this Georgia game, again, in the rain, just showing a lot of toughness, a lot of resilience, and a lot of skill as a solid quarterback. And, the rest is history at this point.
I'm going to throw one out that we didn't bring up on our list, Ben, but is a good one here from Charles Haynes on YouTube right now. Says, I don't remember the year, but the time Bama hit the LSU quarterback so hard he had to crawl off the field. I think that he's probably talking about 2013 against Zach Mettenberger for LSU. Although I could not guarantee you that there has not been another instance of an LSU quarterback crawling off the field in a game against Alabama, but I'm pretty sure that's the one he's talking about.
Yeah, and I don't mean to laugh. I'm not laughing at Zach Mettenberger's expense, just that Alabama fans remember such things as
that's the details. That's what we're talking about. Pettiness. The fact that you remember that game as the guy crawling off the field really says a lot.
Exactly, and you're right. That's exactly what he's talking about. There could be no other image he could be referring to, and I think the game ended with 4 straight sacks to end the game, where poor Zach Mettenberger just nothing could be done. Alabama was just fired up. They were up by 21 points. I think the final score of that game was 38-17, if I'm not mistaken. So it was in the bag for Alabama, just a few seconds remaining, and that's how it had to end for poor Zach Mettenberger and LSU. So, I can move on to number 3 here, Matt. Yeah. My number 3, Notre Dame in 2012. Again, we've talked about this game before when we were ranking the national championships under Nick Saban. This game, so satisfying for so many different reasons for Alabama fans. I mean, this was almost, I think, like the apex of the Nick Saban era for many different reasons. It's a blowout win against an opponent that a lot of Alabama fans have disliked for a long time in Notre Dame. But I feel like the way Alabama dominated this game, the way that they did, I think it eliminated that frustration. It sort of like crushed the monster in the closet that was Notre Dame for all of those years. The Notre Dame problem was over that night. Despite the series record, Alabama won when it mattered, and they won in convincing fashion. And to me, Matt, this is the best example of this brand of quote-unquote joyless murder ball that people associate with Alabama. They were efficient on offense. They had a brutal running game, a dominant defense. And then you had that moment with A.J. McCarron and Barrett Jones at the end where they're arguing about a play or the snap when they're already up by 4 touchdowns in the fourth quarter. And so it's moments like that where it's like Alabama doesn't even care about you. They care more about like what's happening internally. They're not even looking at the scoreboard. Notre Dame may as well not be on the other side of the ball. But Notre Dame had that magical fairy tale season where everybody just assumed that they were going to win because they were undefeated, because they were Notre Dame, never mind who they had played in the talent level on each side of the field. It was Notre Dame and fate. It was fate that they would win the national championship. Obviously not the case. And Notre Dame has been back to the college football playoff since then, so credit to Brian Kelly for, getting back to that point. But I would even make an argument that the program hasn't been the same since that moment, where nobody expects Notre Dame to win anything as a result of that game, and they are not taken seriously. So it's like until they win a game like that against an opponent like Alabama, like Clemson, nobody expects them to do it. And Alabama had to do it again this past year.
Yeah, I do think to some degree. I mean, Notre Dame, and I have friends and family members who grew up Notre Dame fans, and they have been similar, I would say, to Alabama in the mid-2000s. They have been in this mode for so long of saying we can't be down forever. We're going to have our time where we have a resurgence and we come back and have a big rebirth as a program. And they always think the next guy that comes in, they have a slightly better than average season, and the T-shirts get printed in South Bend. And I think by almost any other standard, Notre Dame would feel like they're living in a golden age with Brian Kelly right now. But they happen to like any team who had a good situation, who had a really good team put together in the NBA in the mid 90s. If you were a really good team in the East, sorry, man, nobody remembers you unless you're the Bulls at that time. And I think Notre Dame is going to be one of those programs that looks back at this era and says, we could have really been something, but Alabama was that monkey on our back that we just could not ever shake our way past. And I think this past game was even in some ways more frustrating to Notre Dame fans. If you listen to Brian Kelly after that playoff game they just had, he was upset. He was frustrated. This team made it to the playoffs, and people basically, the questions that were left for Notre Dame after this was, can you ever win the big one? Is this your ceiling? Can you ever get past Alabama? And I'm sure it's frustrating for them, but I don't think Alabama fans, especially older Alabama fans, I don't think feel too bad for them. And honestly, they're one of those programs that I think the country as a whole kind of turns their nose up at a little bit. Doesn't really like, and doesn't, as much as the rest of the country may not like Alabama, I think they kind of enjoy seeing Alabama give it to Notre Dame the way that they have the last couple of times.
Yeah, look, I mean, this is a team and a program that says, I just saw the comment on the screen.
There for sure. That will also be a part of that season, yes.
Yeah, well, it factors in for sure. But look, Notre Dame is one of those programs where it's like the Yankees, even Alabama, Duke, these storied programs, the Boston Celtics, where it's like it's good for that sport when that team is really good, right? Because people are interested. There's national brand recognition. And so like people want to see those classic matchups and want them to do well. It would just be great if Notre Dame could actually be great while people think they're being great. And that has not been the case the past couple of times. They've been very competitive and they've done very well. And those are seasons for them to be proud of. But ultimately, like you said, it's only going to matter and people are only going to take them seriously when they can beat Alabama, when they can beat these big teams. I think Alabama rendered Notre Dame into a bit of a punchline that night. I really do, because after all of that, that was the performance they turned in. That being said, Matt, again, we talk about sort of owning ourselves, right? Owning our history, Alabama's history. They blew Notre Dame out 42-14, 28-point win in convincing fashion. What happened in 2018? Alabama goes undefeated. They make it to the national championship, and they lose by 28 points. So what goes around can come around, and you just got to live with it.
You can still be on the receiving end for sure, yes.
Exactly, but Notre Dame didn't beat Alabama that night. Clemson did, and so Alabama will always own Notre Dame, at least in terms of the most recent national championship narratives.
I will throw this up there from Jay Gibson, labeling them as the Friday fish eaters, which I'm comfortable throwing up here as a Friday fish eater myself.
I was going to say, what does that mean? I can't speak to that. I don't feel comfortable speaking to that.
Catholic thing, but yeah.
Okay.
So let's roll into. I think this is. I think we've got two left that we wanted to highlight. I've got an honorable mention I want to throw out there.
Okay. I'll try to burn through these, Matt.
All right.
So number 2 is Auburn. Pick an Auburn game. Pick one of the Saban Era Auburn games, and they're obviously.
I'm going to throw this one up there,
okay,
because I think it's the pettiest one of the group.
2008 is my personal pick as the Auburn game, which I feel like it feels the most satisfying because again you're closing the book on a couple of things. You're closing the book on that ridiculous streak that Auburn. The fear of the thumb streak, right? And you're closing the book on Tommy Tuberville's tenure as Auburn's head football coach. And, maybe he's having a last laugh, as it were, right now as a U.S. senator in this country, but he is no longer the Auburn coach. And that is partly because of how they lost in Tuscaloosa in 2008. Once again, in the rain, 36-0 in Bryant-Denny Stadium. Again, Alabama didn't have much trash to talk. After how many years? Was it 6 or 7 years that they had beaten Alabama straight?
6 in a row,
in the Iron Bowl. So not a fun period, and Auburn enjoyed that. I know Alabama fans will throw up, what the circumstances were. They'll contextualize it as best they can. But look, when you're being petty, Matt, context doesn't matter. A win is a win, and Auburn won those games. But in 2008, man, it just all washed away very quickly with the dominating fashion that Alabama won. And that place was so fired up. Like, that is one of the most fired up atmospheres that I can remember as an Alabama football fan, was just squashing Auburn the way that they did. Just amazing performances from guys like Glenn Coffey, Nikita Stover, John Parker Wilson, obviously the starting quarterback. There was even a glimpse of the future with a couple of touchdowns from Mark Ingram. You had the Greg McElroy as the backup, who would obviously be the national championship quarterback the next season, coming in for a bomb pass late in the game that Alabama did not win. A bit of a petty touchdown on Alabama's part to Marquise Mays for another touchdown to make it 36-0. Just very satisfying, Matt. I don't know what your memories are of that game. Again, I can throw out even 2011 when Alabama beat them 42-14 after Auburn had won the national championship. I can mention 2012 when Alabama beat them 49-0 in Bryant-Denny Stadium. But for whatever reason, that 2008 game was very satisfying.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I remember the build-up to the 2008 game probably more than anything else. I do remember it was obviously a dominant defensive game. I remember Cody Burns getting sacked a lot in that game. But I think it really felt, and I think to people who are not in this fan base, I think to people who don't understand the Bama fan mentality, this is going to sound like it would be something that's boring and that's not exciting or enjoyable, but it felt inevitable going into the game. I don't think there were very many people in their right minds walking into Bryant-Denny Stadium that day thinking that Auburn had a remote chance of winning that game. They were 5-6 on the season. Alabama was going into that game undefeated at that point. They were about to cap off a 12-0 regular season. It was very clear who the superior team was. And I think that made it feel almost like this sort of coronation game. There had been a long streak. I think everybody had accepted that it was about to end. And it was this kind of, it was a thing the public square needed to see happen at that point in this state. And I think I can remember pre-game, there were a couple of things that really helped get people super hyped about that game. One of them being that Saran Stacy, a former Alabama great, who had in recent years had tragically lost most of his family members in an accident. He ran the game ball out on the field. Really super emotional moment. And the crowd, I think, fully aware of his story and his situation, just went absolutely nuts for Saran Stacy running out onto the field. I can remember that there was a memorable national anthem by Sarah Evans, who at that point I think was already married to Jay Barker at that point. So it was a little bit of an Alabama football royalty situation. So, there was they kind of pulled out all the stops, and it had a similar atmosphere to me to today, what we would feel like almost like A-Day or one of the national championship celebrations that you have in that stadium. I know this is probably the kind of stuff that makes people hate Alabama fans, but that's what the vibe was. Everybody knew what the outcome was going to be, but they wanted to be there and see it happen because it was significant regardless of whether it was predictable or not.
Wait, which national championship celebration are you talking about? It would be.
It's inside the stadium, I think. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay. There have just been so many that I just it's hard to remember. But no, you're right. That Saran Stacy moment was like an all-timer moment. If you're in the building for that, I do think that there is like a grainy YouTube video of that you can find out there. But
it's sort of pre-video, yeah.
Yeah, it probably won't do it justice. But you're absolutely right. It was special. and it fired the place up. And again, this is one of those things where it's just like, Auburn obviously wasn't on Alabama's level that year. Why are you so hyped about this game? Like, why do you care so much about this? And it's just like, well, we're being petty here, like that's the thing. It's like, it's the Iron Bowl, first of all. And number two, you mentioned it capped an undefeated regular season. It was Nick Saban's first Iron Bowl win as head coach at Alabama. So a lot of different things factor into why I think we remember that so well. And I think it was one of those games where, the opposing fan base started filing out relatively early. And I forget who says that's it being the earmark of a blank whooping when you see that.
That is a Nick Saban quote. Yes.
There you go.
Yeah.
So yeah, that may be where that even originated. I don't know, but yeah, very, very satisfying, as you can imagine.
For sure. All right, we've got one more that we want to hit up.
Okay, my number one, the catalyst for this list, Matt, 2009, Florida, Tebow tears, Matt. Like, come on, like, how is this not the pettiest win in Alabama history? I mean, picture shortly after that, when the new NCAA PlayStation football game was coming out. And this was like when people's Photoshop games were like really stepping up. I think Tebow was going to be the cover guy for that game that year. And it didn't take 2 seconds for somebody to mock up an NCAA football cover with crying Tim Tebow on the cover of it. And Alabama fans sharing that.
Yeah. The original Crying Jordan, yeah.
Sharing that on their walls on Facebook back in 2009 or whatever it was back then. So, yeah, it's got to be this game. I mean, but, again, to Tebow's credit, he beat Alabama the year before. He was the top dog. Florida won the national championship. Similar to the Auburn game, it was about getting something off of Alabama's back, right? Like they had to climb that mountaintop, and Tim Tebow and his undefeated team was there waiting for Alabama too. And Alabama just did it again in dominating fashion. It was amazing to watch. And it was clear, I think, to a lot of people that Alabama was going to win the national championship, no matter if it was Texas or whoever. But, Tim Tebow, by all accounts, nice guy, good-hearted Christian fellow who said all the right things and did all the right things as a player, and has, I think, since then.
Yeah, the overwhelming sentiment from the commenters here too is they are all mentioning this as a moment that they love, but they throw in the caveat of, "But I like Tebow and I respect him." I think a lot of that was, and I think you were probably getting to this. I don't think it's so much that Bama fans hate Tebow. I think it has a lot more to do with that they don't like the hype that surrounds him, that comes not from himself, but really from other people around him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, true for the NFL too, apparently. It's not really about what he did on the field. It's about these weird, intangible things that create this sort of like mythological thing. I don't really understand it, but Tim Tebow, the reason I think Alabama fans, quote unquote, hated Tim Tebow was the same reason we talked about Cam Newton being a big villain for Alabama. He beat Alabama. He denied Alabama victory. He denied Alabama a shot at a national championship, unlike Cam Newton. And so Tim Tebow was this figure that was larger than life and larger than college football, arguably the greatest player in the history of the sport in the eyes of many. And Alabama vanquished him. They beat him. They beat Urban Meyer, and that would have been enough. But poor Tim Tebow, who put his heart and soul into the game, the guy just, he went on one knee and the tears started flowing, and he just inadvertently gave Alabama fans more ammunition than they needed in terms of bragging rights, in terms of being Alabama fans on their way to their first national championship of this dynasty. Memories, so many more memories, hundreds if not thousands of memories that they could create that would last a lifetime, but they will never forget when Tebow cried. I mean, what like Tim Tebow, I mean, even using the format of Bible verses to create T-shirts about this, where, Tim Tebow would wear Bible verses on his eye black and his patches under his eyes, and Alabama fans were going wherever they could to say, I can't remember the score, but it's like 34:13, Tebow cried, in the Georgia Dome or something like that. That's as petty as it gets, Matt.
Yeah,
I mean,
for sure.
It is. I mean, you see all these ridiculous, corny sayings, like, blank so-and-so lied, so-and-so, whatever, and Tebow cried. These numbers, or these
Cam lied.
Exactly. So, again, petty. That's the name of the game. Unfortunately, I certainly don't indulge, and I don't own one of those T-shirts, Matt. I'll say that, but it was fun. It was fun seeing the aftermath of it, to be sure. And he has a reputation that speaks for itself as a college football player, and what he did at Florida, 2-time national championship winner, Heisman winner. But Alabama will always have this, Matt. They will always have making him cry at the end of his college football career, denying him one more shot at a national championship in dominating fashion. That's just the way it is.
We've got a late addition here, and I was going to throw out a honorable mention game, but Anthony wants to know if 2012 LSU was on our list. We did not talk about 2012 LSU because honestly, I think that one was actually pretty competitive. I would say more so than petty. The 2012 LSU game was. Alabama had to fight and scratch and claw their way to that win. But I do have an LSU game on this list that I wanted to mention. And my addition I wanted to make was last year's 2020 LSU game. I think that one turned into an opportunity for Alabama to get revenge for, I think, a game that really burned Alabama fans a lot to lose. That 2019 LSU game that really sort of sealed the deal for that LSU team being, the national champions that year, and suddenly getting them praise as the greatest college football team of all time. I think it really burned Bama fans because they felt like they weren't at full strength for that game, and it just wasn't. It didn't feel like a fair fight, I think, to a lot of Bama fans. And I'm sure LSU fans would say that about the 2020 team, that wasn't LSU at their full strength. They had so many guys sitting out. They had guys that had opted out for the season. Alabama did not care. They did not take mercy. They absolutely obliterated that LSU team. And Devontae Smith arguably won the Heisman Trophy that night. I mean, we could say that about a lot of different nights, but I think that was a pretty key moment for Devontae Smith in making a statement to say, I am the best player in college football. And he did it against LSU, his home state team.
Yeah, great example, Matt, because I think the reason I'm going to make this petty is because Alabama recovers after national championship wins, and when they lose all of these draft picks and they lose all of these coaches and there's so much turnover, right? LSU did not prove that they could do that. Now, you have to consider the circumstances of COVID-19 and players opting out and all of that stuff. Alabama managed to convince their players to opt in. And again, the rest is history. They went on to win another national championship. Two more I want to just mention briefly. If we want to talk petty. Now, we talked about 2009 Florida. We got to mention 2009 Texas, too. I mean, petty only because whenever someone says, yeah, but Colt got hurt, another Alabama fan does not care. Like another angel getting its wings when you hear a bell ring, right? Like it does not, and it never will matter that Colt got hurt in that game. Alabama won that national championship. And the last thing is Auburn 2017. Auburn technically won that game, didn't they? But as our pal out there in the social media sphere, Hunter Johnson, constantly points out, the 2017 Iron Bowl did not matter, because Alabama could afford to lose that game, still make the college football playoff, and still win a national championship. So thank you, Auburn, for giving Alabama the reminder, the encouragement that they needed, the motivation that they needed to win another national championship. So
if not a win, it was a petty, it was a elite moment of pettiness for Alabama football. Just the aftermath of the 2017 Iron Bowl, for sure.
Yeah, congratulations to Auburn on that win. Big win.
Definitely a fun list and lots of good contributions from the comment section today on YouTube and Facebook. So thanks to everybody for contributing. We're glad to keep football on your minds. As somebody mentioned in the comments earlier, this discussion was making her hype for the season, and we still got a long way to go. And I'm glad that we're able to deliver little small doses of that in the off season. We're not even to June yet, not even to the full thick of summer, but we're getting some good fun moments of football discussion in. And Ben, you got something else?
No, I was just pointing. I think that there's a little somebody making a cameo right there.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, that's yeah. So anyway, she had her 2 cents. A lot of petty wins
right.
that she wants to talk about. We'll do that off the mic though. So thanks,
Yeah,
Matt.
nice. All right. Well, thanks again, everybody, and we will see you guys next week on Bammers.